Just let me know.
Your twins would be slingshot into deep space by Granddaddy Jupiter on their way to explore the. It generates the same vibrations used to create it. And so too
are but a small part of this immense universe that surrounds us, and it is with humility and hope that we take this step.
the aliens will then be treated to a series of greetings spoken in 58 different languages.
Konnichiwa, o genki desu ka?
Siyanibingelela maqhawe, sinifisela inkonzo ende.
Hälsningar från en dataprogrammerare i den lilla universitetsstaden Ithaca på planeten Jorden.
Silema Khemen. धरती के वासियों की ओर से नमस्कार.
Hola y saludos a todos.
تحياتنا للأصدقاء في النجوم يا ليت يجمعنا الزمان.
Shalom.
Salvete quicumque estis. Bonam erga vos voluntatem habemus, et pacem per astra ferimus.
各位都好吧，我们都很想念你们，有空请到这儿来玩。
Пересилаємо привіт із нашого світу, бажаємо щастя, здоров'я і многоя літа.
Hello from the children of planet Earth.
This is followed by various sounds of things like weather, animals, and technology, before the record ends with a playlist of nearly 90 minutes of music covering a vast array of instruments, styles, and cultures. It starts about halfway through the A side of the record with an uplifting composition by Johann Bach. After another 9 tracks, including a famous American rock single and many obscure folk songs from around the world, the music picks up again on the record's B-side with another banger by Johann Bach. After nearly an hour's worth of additional music from countries like Germany, Peru, Russia, China, and India, just to name a few, the golden record comes to a significant end with a full rendition of Beethoven's Cavatina. Nearly half a century later, Voyager 1 is now the most distant spacecraft ever launched. Even though it was preceded by the Pioneer probes by several years, and even its own twin by 2 weeks, Voyager 1 attained a greater escape velocity and in a sense overtaken them all. Amazingly, both Voyagers are still transmitting to this day, although they're fast approaching their operational limits. Once they go offline and fall out of range, they'll join their pioneering brethren in a timeless and destinationless trek between the stars. Because the interstellar medium is sparsely populated with tiny dust particles, the exposed surfaces of both the Pioneer plaques and the golden records will erode over time. While the former is somewhat protected by its inward-facing placement, it's still exposed to the vacuum of space. On the other hand, the golden records are firmly pressed up against the body of the spacecraft. According to one estimate, the outward-facing B-side could survive for at least a few billion years, whereas the lifespan of the concealed A-side is anyone's guess. It's not impossible that many tens or even hundreds of billions of years from now, all the photographs, greetings, and 1/3 of the music will still be intact. While the response to the golden records was overwhelmingly positive, they did nonetheless receive a bit of criticism. Much like before, some people were completely undeterred by the near impossibility of interception and feared the Voyagers might attract a hostile intelligence. Others focused more on the contents of the message because they felt it was disingenuous to paint humanity in such a positive light when war, crime, and cruelty are as much a part of the human condition as music, sports, and science. As one of the makers of the record, John Lomberg, so succinctly points out,
more human beings have killed one another or starved to death than have written string quartets.
The decision to exclude the uglier sides of humanity was partly to avoid potential backlash from people here on Earth, but also an attempt to make us seem less hostile to any future recipients. While a mushroom cloud does convey a shameful yet significant part of who we are, it could also be perceived as a threat. On the other hand, the exclusion of such imagery could by itself be quite revealing, as we expose our casual willingness to deceive through tactful omission. Dating profiles, job interviews, meeting someone for the first time. I don't know if this is what the Golden Records team had in mind, but being selective with the truth to make a good first impression, how terribly human of them. The three initiatives mentioned so far are likely to be the only ones you've heard of before. The Pioneer Plaques, the Arecibo Message, and especially the Golden Records generated immense public interest at the time and remain well known to this day. But our attempts to communicate with life beyond did not end with the Golden Records. In fact, just a few years later, the silence was broken yet again, and this time the target was so close, the minimum response time was measured not in eons, but decades. In early 1983, Japanese publishing company Shueisha was looking for ways to commemorate the 15th anniversary of their most popular manga anthology magazine known as Weekly Shonen Jump. Due to the recent success of the film E.T. by Steven Spielberg and the fact that 1983 had been declared the World Communications Year by the United Nations, they decided to launch a competition dubbed Call to the Cosmos. The prize was a trip across the Pacific to visit a large radio telescope in Stanford, California, from which a message would be transmitted to a nearby star system. To win, all you had to do was submit a proposal for what the message should say. With a readership in the millions, the magazine received nearly 50,000 message ideas from children across the country. These were then compiled into one abbreviated message, and 15 lucky winners were selected to tag along on the trip. For the selection of a transmission target, the organizers turned to two radio astronomers named Masaki Morimoto and Hisashi Hirabayashi. They eventually chose the star Altair because it's very bright and relatively close. It was also selected because the message was planned to be transmitted during an annual Japanese festival known as Tanabata, which celebrates the meeting of two celestial deities represented by the stars Vega and Altair. Furthermore, Morimoto and Hirabayashi were asked to create their own message, and after 3 days of work, they came up with this. A sequence of 13 bitmaps measuring 71 by 71 pixels that were clearly inspired by the Arecibo message. The first 4 images depict things like natural numbers, prime numbers, basic math, common elements, the solar system, and essential building blocks of DNA. The next 8 illustrate the evolution of life from simple organisms to jellyfish, fish, amphibians, dinosaurs, apparently not Bigfoot, a family of humans, and a close-up of a woman's face. The final bitmap depicts a crude illustration of the Stanford radio telescope alongside information like its radius, wavelength of the transmission, and total number of bits in the message. We also find the word toast written in plain English. According to Hirabayashi, during the 3-day stint when he and Morimoto conceived of these images, they weren't necessarily sober the whole way through. This may or may not have influenced their decision to include the Japanese and English word for toast, equated to the chemical formula for ethanol. Because Weekly Shonen Jump targets a very young demographic, the magazine tried to clean this up a bit by reframing what was clearly an afterthought by 2 half-drunk astronomers as
a toast between Japan and the United States.
Nevertheless, for about an hour on August 15th, 1983, the 13 bitmaps and an audio recording of the abridged fan-submitted greetings were beamed towards Altair.
こんにちは、こんにちは、こんにちは。こちらは太陽系第3番目の惑星地球です。この電波は青い宇宙船地球号からまだ会ったことのない友達 ET のあなたたちへ平和と友好の願いを込めて送信されました。この計画をして日本という国の多くの子供たちからメッセージが寄せられました。私たちの地球はもうすぐ新しい世紀を迎えます。その21世紀にはあなたたちと会えるかもしれません。だからさようならは言いません。もう一度友情の挨拶を送ります。こんにちは、こんにちは、こんにちは。
Altair is among the brightest stars in the night sky, and at a distance of less than 17 light years, it's only, a few quadrillion stone throws away? In fact, Altair is so cosmically close that enough time has now passed for the transmission to have made a full round trip. That is to say, the message reached Altair back around the millennium shift, and we could have received the reply as early as 2017. Now, the fact that we never did does not necessarily mean there's nobody home. Perhaps they missed the brief 60-minute window when the message swept across their system. Perhaps they did pick it up, but they're still drafting a response. Perhaps they took one quick look at Earth and humanity and were like, nah, we good. While all of these scenarios are of course equally probable, the most equal is unfortunately the first one. Not only have astronomers failed to detect a planet around Altair, but even if one does exist, the star's only been around for about 100 million years. Compare that to a 4.6 billion year veteran like the Sun, and things start to look a bit bleak. Sure, there's always the possibility that intelligent life typically evolves much faster than it did here on Earth, but we currently have no good reason to think that's the case. But it gets worse because even if the Altarians did respond, the odds of us even noticing are extremely remote, because telescopes are expensive, in low supply, and high demand. Sacrificing years, months, or even just days worth of observation time to screen a single planetless star for alien signals ain't exactly top priority. It wasn't until the summer of 2023 that a team led by astronomer Shinya Narusawa secured a brief time slot at the Yasuda Deep Space Center in Japan to search for a belated response to the Altair message. Scheduled once again to coincide with the annual Tanabata Festival, the search began late in the evening on August the 22nd and lasted for a grand total of 60 minutes. Remaining optimistic, Narusawa told reporters the following morning that they wouldn't immediately know if an alien signal had been detected because it would take a long time to analyze the terabytes of collected data. But given the lack of updates since then, I wouldn't keep my hopes up on this one. If nothing else, the message to Altair was received loud and clear by thousands of children across Japan. In fact, Call to the Cosmos seems to have had a bit of a rippling effect because a whole series of messages designed by Japanese children would later be transmitted for several years in a row. But before we get to all of that, we're going to take a brief detour into the dazzling world of censorship. As mentioned before, when the public became aware that NASA had bolted a plaque to the side of Pioneer 10, not everyone approved. But it wasn't just about the risk of attracting dangerous aliens, it was also about modesty. You see, some people were absolutely mortified to learn that the plaques featured line drawings of two naked humans engaged in the scandalous act of standing there.
I must say, I was shocked by the blatant display of both male and female sex organs on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. Surely, this type of sexual exploitation is below the standards our community has come to expect from the Times. Isn't it bad enough that we must tolerate the bombardment of pornography through the media of film and smut magazines? Isn't it bad enough that our own space agency officials have found it necessary to spread this filth even beyond our own solar system?
As amusing as that is, the controversy surrounding the plaque's nudity has been somewhat exaggerated over the years. These puritanical takes were muted and few, to quote Carl Sagan, and it's genuinely difficult to find examples like the one you just heard. There were a handful of reductive headlines, and some newspapers opted for the Barbie and Ken doll treatment, but the vast majority published the full, uncensored image and barely even mentioned the couple. In fact, some criticized the plaques not for showing the human form, but for not showing enough. More specifically, people took issue with the complete absence of visible female genitalia, considering that no such neutering had been applied to the man. It's unclear if the lack of anatomical detail on the lower half of the woman was demanded by prudish NASA officials or a decision made by the Sagans themselves. Conflicting accounts makes it difficult to know exactly who's to blame. Nevertheless, when it came time to select material for the golden records a few years later, these concerns flared up again. Fearing a repeat of the previous debacle, NASA religiously vetted every song, soundbite, and image that Sagan & Co. sought to include. They ultimately rejected a nude photograph of a young man and pregnant woman intended to show both human anatomy and procreation. The reason I'm bringing this up is because in 1986, an American artist by the name of Joe Davis decided to fight back against all this pearl-clutching with a project known as Poetica Vaginal. With the help of a few ballerinas and other volunteers, Davis used a custom-made device to record, how do I put this? Contractions from within the female reproductive system. Those pressure oscillations were then artistically manipulated to create something that's meant to resemble human speech. After obtaining access to a radio telescope near the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Davis and his team began transmitting the sounds into space. However, the broadcast only lasted for about 15 to 20 minutes before the project was prematurely terminated by an Air Force colonel who was apparently overseeing the facility. Nevertheless, according to Davis, those few minutes were enough to transmit brief snippets of audio to each of the 4 selected targets. 2 of them were never publicly identified as far as I can tell, while the other 2 are known as Epsilon Eridani and Tau Ceti. Epsilon Eridani is home to one confirmed planet with a mass nearly identical to that of Jupiter. While additional planets could exist, including ones that resemble Earth, Eridani is a relative newcomer to the Milky Way family at approximately 500 million years young. On the other hand, Tau Ceti is certifiably ancient. Its precise age remains unclear, but it's definitely older than the Sun and home to not just 1 but 4 confirmed planets. On top of that, there's a slim chance that 2 of them are grazing the inner and outer bounds of the habitable zone, that being the distance from the star at which water could remain liquid on the surface of an Earth-like planet. Unfortunately, both of these stars are surrounded by immense belts of debris, not unlike the asteroid and Kuiper belts in the solar system. The difference is that Epsilon Eridani and Tau Ceti retain asteroidal and cometary populations many times greater than what currently orbits the Sun. While this makes perfect sense for a youngster like Eridani, it's a lot more concerning for a galactic grandparent like Tau Ceti. It implies that something is either preventing that material from coalescing into planets across billions of years, or that the system has suffered a recent cascade of instability. In either case, more stuff almost certainly means more impact events like the one that nearly wiped out the dinosaurs. But even if we optimistically assume that none of that's a problem, the mass and size of the planets orbiting Tau Ceti are highly uncertain. There's a good chance they have less in common with Earth, and more so with Uranus and Neptune. But even if that isn't the case, the chemical makeup of Tau Ceti appears to be quite different from the Sun, suggesting its planets are composed of materials quite different from those that spawned life in the solar system. In summary, it's not looking great. Now, it may seem pointless to consider the habitability of these distant worlds when the message we send towards them is completely indecipherable. I mean, if you thought the aliens were gonna struggle with the golden records, good luck to them figuring this out. But just like the Arecibo message, the artificial nature of the signal is a message in and of itself. If you want to believe there's a naturally occurring phenomenon capable of producing the exact same radio waves as those emitted by Joe Davis and his team back in 1986, you go right ahead. But somehow I have my doubts about that. Presuming the message was received and correctly identified as a technosignature, we could have received a reply from the Eridanians as early as 2007, or the Cetinites as early as 2010. I did some checking and regretfully have to inform you that humanity's been ghosted once again. About a decade after the message to Altair, the National Space Development Agency of Japan began hosting an annual space camp event for young children known as the Cosmic College. Students could choose from a bunch of different activities over the course of multiple days, including a class on how to write and send interstellar messages. In fact, one of the astronomers invited to lecture at these events was none other than Hisashi Hirabayashi, one of the creators of the Altair message. But it wasn't just a theoretical exercise. NASA actually arranged for some of those messages to be transmitted into space. Once a year, between at least 1995 and 1998, simple bitmap images measuring 11 by 11 pixels were sent from the Yasuda Deep Space Center to various locations across the galaxy. These transmissions received next to no publicity at the time and are virtually unknown to this day. This makes it difficult to know exactly what was sent where and when. Here's what we do know. The first Cosmic College was held in August 1995, during which this image of two parents and a child was beamed towards some unknown destination within the constellation Libra. Even less is known about this image of an alien holding hands with a human, transmitted sometime in August 1996. This time we don't even know the general region of the sky to which it might have been sent. In August 1997, two bitmaps were beamed towards a binary star system known as Spica. The first image depicts a smiley face, while the other shows a Japanese dumpling known as a dango next to a steaming cup of tea. Unfortunately, Spica is a ticking time bomb because the two stars are expected to slowly encroach upon one another, which could trigger a supernova at some point in the future. Even if that wasn't the case, they're far too young to host an Earth-like planet, and even if that wasn't the case, it would take another 5 centuries for any replies to reach us. Finally, this image that simply says 1 + 1 = 2 was transmitted to some unknown location in August 1998. Now, there could be more of these transmissions that have been lost to time. For instance, an image of a leaf to symbolize the nature of Earth appears to have been designed during the Cosmic College of 1999, but I couldn't find any information on whether it was actually beamed into space. While competitions, art projects, and recreational programs certainly could generate an alien response, their primary function is to elicit a response from us down here on Earth. They're inspiring, provocative, and generally attract a lot of attention. So it was only a matter of time before someone came along and began charging a fee. In early 1998, American entrepreneur Charles Schaefer announced a commercial venture known as Encounter 2001. The project sought to crowdfund the launch of a tiny, light-sailing spacecraft that would carry samples of human DNA beyond the solar system. For only $50, anyone could submit a few strands of hair along with a brief message and their portrait and join the so-called Millennial Voyage. Market analysis by Schaefer and his team projected sales of anywhere between 1.5 and 4.5 million tickets before the launch date. If those figures seem a bit optimistic, they were nothing compared to the expectations of their customers.
Me and my girlfriend can't have children, and in a deep philosophical way, this may be one way for my genetic makeup to live on, with a minute chance that it might be recovered by another species and we might be recreated, and I could fall in love with my girlfriend all over again on another planet.
This idea that aliens might one day use your DNA to clone your body was surprisingly prevalent. For instance, the greeting submitted by renowned science fiction author Sir Arthur C. Clarke simply read, "Farewell, my clone." While the Millennial Voyage was the project's main objective, they also promised to beam participants' greetings into space ahead of the launch using a radio telescope, a side project that would come to be known as the Cosmic Calls. By spring of 1999, some 43,000 people had signed up for Encounter 2001, including 2 Canadian astrophysicists named Yvan Duhhlion and Stéphane Demas. Duhhlion and Demas had been given the task of creating what's known as a primer. A primer attempts to gradually introduce the recipients to more complex ideas using some sort of step-by-step process. For instance, the primer to the message to Altair were the 13 bitmaps sent alongside the far more complicated greeting in Japanese. Duhhlion and Demas did something similar for the Cosmic Calls. They created a primer composed of 23 bitmaps, and this first one starts off by listing the 10 digits of our decimal system using 3 different notations: unary, binary, and decimal. An idea they appear to have lifted from this image on the Golden Records, which did almost the exact same thing. But there is of course one very noticeable difference. The one from the Golden Records uses the familiar glyphs of Arabic numerals, whereas the primer to the Cosmic Calls uses these alien-looking symbols. That's because Duhhlion decided to create their own rudimentary language of sorts. Now, this might seem like an odd choice because whether, say, a 2 looks like this or like this, it's not going to make any difference to the recipients. But it's not about readability, it's about redundancy. You see, there's a lot of naturally occurring radiation that could interfere with the radio transmission between the source and destination. Imagine, for instance, that we transmitted 15 bits arranged like this to represent the number 8. If this one bit in the middle was flipped along the way, the recipients would pick up a 0 instead of an 8. Flip this bit and the 8 becomes a 6. Flip these two and it becomes a 5. In other words, this transmission has no redundancy whatsoever. Lose one bit and the entire message could become corrupted. The glyphs created by the Duhhlion were designed to be as fault-tolerant and noise-resistant as possible. There are several bits of difference between all the symbols, and that still holds true even if they were to be mirrored or rotated. But apart from the symbolic difference, the Cosmic Call Primer follows a structure that should be very familiar at this point. The first 5 pages cover various mathematical concepts that gradually increase in complexity. The next 6 delve into chemistry and physics, including a schematic of the solar system. The next 8 are all about Earth, humanity, and biology, including a rendition of the Pioneer couple and a 2-page map of the continents. Page 21 contains information about the transmission and telescope, while page 22 brags about our cosmological knowledge like the age of the universe. The 23rd and final page invites the aliens to respond by asking them a series of questions using this flower-looking glyph as a stand-in for a question mark. For instance, this means velocity, while this means photon, so this question could be read as, what is the speed of light? But how could the aliens possibly know that these symbols mean question, velocity, and photon? Well, it all comes down to that first page of numbers to which everything else is anchored. The aliens would start by hypothesizing that these 10 symbols represent 10 digits in a base 10 numeral system. With that assumption locked in place, they'd move on to the next page and find 1 something 1 equals 2. Okay, so they now suspect that this symbol represents addition and make similar assumptions regarding subtraction, multiplication, and division. Once they get to page 4, they'd know that this reads something plus 2 equals 3, while this reads something plus 4 equals 10. Given that the same symbol is used to represent what is clearly not the same value, they might suspect that this is a placeholder for a variable quantity. In other words, this variable represents something unknown, a bit like a question mark, emphasized by this symbol off to the left. By gradually introducing new symbols alongside familiar ones in such a way that logic and process of elimination can be used to fill in the blanks, it creates a lot of mutual corroboration between the pages. By page 8, they'd be introduced to the concepts of time and length via hydrogen, followed by velocity and photons via the speed of light. To be clear, there's still plenty of room for confusion and misinterpretation, not least of all because a few typos did actually slip through the cracks. For instance, according to this line on the 7th page, uranium is said to have 116 neutrons, but there is no such element. The lightest known isotope of uranium has 122 neutrons, and the most abundant here on Earth has 146, which is probably what they meant. But even if the primer had been flawless, there's only so much hand-holding one can do when you don't even know if the recipients have hands. In addition to the primer, the language created by the Duhhlion was used to write the message about the Millennial Voyage. This was followed by a copy of the Arecibo message, greetings by the staff at Encounter 2001, as well as the 43,000 names and greetings from people around the world. With assistance from prominent Russian astronomer Alexander Zaitsev, Schaefer and his team then obtained access to the Eupatoria Deep Space Center in southern Ukraine, and the first cosmic call began broadcasting on May the 24th, 1999.
Greetings from Terra, or Earth, the third planet in the Sol system. As a member of the human race, I would like to extend goodwill to you and your race.
Give us a couple 100,000 years before you plan to visit us, please. Right now, we would have to run around saying, excuse the mess.
I hope the International Space Station program will succeed. I hope peaceful universe, and I hope we can find friends in the universe.
This message comes from 5th grade students of Earth, the third planet from the Sun and part of the Milky Way galaxy. We are peaceful humans. Please answer.
There is life and diversity everywhere you look on our world. I hope the same is true on your world. Life should be common and treasured.
Caution. We humans are a confusing and confused group of bipeds. We need guidance and desperately seek help for our very survival. We offer versatility, curiosity, humor, fear, and love.
Unlike many previous initiatives, which received very little attention from the press and public, the cosmic calls were a global phenomenon. In fact, the project received so much attention that officials at the National Space Agency of Ukraine got a bit spooked. The plan was to beam the message to 4 nearby star systems, but after the first transmission on May the 24th, Ukrainian officials suddenly shut the whole thing down. According to Zaitsev, rumors had begun circulating that the reason Encounter 2001 were using the Eupatoria Deep Space Center was because they'd been denied access to American facilities out of concern it might be dangerous to transmit messages into space. In reality, other radio observatories like Arecibo were simply not available on the dates requested. It had nothing to do with malevolent aliens. Zaitsev spent over a month explaining this to the agency before Schaefer and his team were allowed to resume broadcasting on the last day of June. The first target was 16 Cygni A, a sun-like star that's part of a ternary system. In other words, it's a system of 3 stars, with Cygni A being encircled by a small red dwarf labeled C, and together they orbit another sun-like star labeled B that's nearly 6 times further away than Voyager 1 is from the Sun. While Cygni B does have one confirmed planet, it's an enormous gas giant that patrols the entire habitable zone, making it impossible for an Earth-like planet within that region to maintain a stable orbit. While the transmission was specifically directed at Cygni A, the situation doesn't improve much because, as far as we know, it doesn't have any planets. Instead, it's orbited by Cygni C at about twice the distance between the Sun and Pluto. It's definitely possible for an Earth-like planet to be sandwiched between them, but it all comes down to the precise orbit of Cygni C, which is currently unknown. The second target was Gliese 746, a binary system composed of a sun-like primary and a smaller companion of which very little is known. The distance between them is less than that between the Sun and Mercury, so there's no chance of finding an Earth-like planet in a stable orbit around either one. However, there is such a thing as circumbinary planets that orbit 2 stars at once. With a system as tightly bound as Gliese 746, there's plenty of space for such